The Roman Empire, an ancient superpower, renowned for its splendor, sophistication, and savagery.
Let the games begin!
The Romans ruled vast territories that stretched from the wild Atlantic coast of Britain to the parched deserts of the Middle East. I'm traveling across the Roman world.
But
to discover how the Romans built their great empire. With violence and brutality.
What have you done?
In this programme, two rebels who dare to take on the might of the Roman Empire. An escaped slave.
My name is Spartacus.
And a warrior queen.
I am Boudica.
And as Rome strikes back, both must be prepared to pay the ultimate price. Rome started out in life just as a modest little village on the banks of the River Tiber. But it would rise to become the master of the ancient world.
victory for Rome!
The Romans came to dominate much of the then known world, bringing with them an era of prosperity and security. They built roads, aqueducts and baths, hallmarks of civilization. But for millions of the people they conquered, Rome's triumph came at a terrible price. Lands were seized, women and men raped and killed. Many physically became property of the empire. For Rome, the spoils of conquest weren't just territories and treasures, but slaves. By the 1st century BC, Romans depended on around 1.5 million of them. So had you been walking down these streets then, 1 in 5 of the people that you passed would have been unfree. The massive majority of these women and men were treated with absolute brutality. The Romans were savvy enough to know that they were creating an enemy within the empire. All slaves were considered potential insurgents, and their masters often had to resort to brutal measures to keep the upper hand. One day, in 73 BC, Rome's fears came true. Here in Capua, 100 miles southeast of Rome, a man called Spartacus led a group of highly trained specialist slaves, gladiators, in a desperate attempt to escape. This was a do-or-die mission that turned into a mass revolt and threw the Roman Republic into crisis. We know very little about the early years of the man who led this infamous revolt against Rome. According to one Roman source, he came from Thrace, lands that stretched across Central Europe and into Asia. The Thracian people had a long, proud warrior tradition. There's actually a possibility that the name Spartacus is the Latin version of a Thracian word, sparadakos, famous for his spear. But according to Appian, initially Spartacus wasn't actually fighting against the Romans, but with them, probably as some kind of a mercenary. Spartacus the soldier must have committed some sort of crime to have been thrown out of the Roman army. It needn't have been a very serious crime. An act of insubordination against an officer, perhaps? Or perhaps desertion. Either way, Roman punishment was always swift and, for us, incredibly harsh. In Spartacus's case, it was the start of a hellish journey into slavery. There's one place we can still get a real sense of the fate that awaited Spartacus. This is Pompeii. In 79 AD, it was buried under volcanic rock and ash spewed out by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. So, much Roman life is preserved for us to discover almost 2,000 years later.
Slaves would often have worked and slept in small businesses like this. This is a laundry, and they'd have spent their day trampling cloth soaked in urine. In fact, they did pretty much everything. They taught children, they combed hair, they cleared up shit, they dug fields. And at night, they were often put to bed in tiny little cubicles like battery hens, or just slept rough. The fact that whipping boy was a very popular name for slaves suggests just how desperate life was for the massive majority.
Once you've lost your freedom, and often your dignity, there is little else left to lose. So this was a system that could only work with the strictest of measures to stop slaves like Spartacus from attempting to escape their fate.
This metal tag would originally have been attached to a collar, and the inscription on it reads, "Hold me fast if I run away, and then return me to my master Viventius on the estate of Callistus." Now, today, this is the kind of thing that you'd put on a dog, but this was almost certainly attached to a human. You see images of them time and time again. Slaves chain-ganged together with iron bands around their neck. These would be men and women who in real life would have been covered head to foot with bruises. It is just hideous to think of the isolation of someone who wore something like this and who tried to escape, and then the retribution that would have been meted out on them if they were ever caught. We have numerous accounts of slaves slipping away at night or running off during errands, even committing suicide. Men and women who just couldn't bear the life that they'd been given. But there was a particular class of slaves who lived a uniquely nightmarish existence. These were the most extreme slaves, gladiators.
This was the fate that awaited Spartacus. A future so bleak and violent, it would push him to risk everything on a seemingly impossible escape. Slaves drove the economy of ancient Rome. By the time of Spartacus, there was a slave market in every major city of the empire. Men and women legally classed as property were bought and sold like cattle.
Look at him!
A former soldier like Spartacus would have quickly caught the eye of a gladiator master.
All fine warriors bred to fight to the death. Huh?
True. But at these prices, I cannot afford for them to kill each other.
Now, let me sell you some to kill. Yeah.
Spartacus was bought by the owner of the famous Capua gladiator school in southern Italy, just 25 miles from Pompeii. From the slave market, he'd have been taken straight to the gladiator school, or ludus, to begin his training.
A ludus was a kind of combination of a prison and a school for gladiators. And the open courtyard where I'm walking now is where the men would have trained. We think there are around 140 or so of them here, and they'd have fought out here during the day and then slept, 2 men to a cell, in the rooms behind me. In these places, conditions were phenomenally tough. These were men with nothing left to lose, being trained in the art of death as spectacle.
we know the name of another gladiator at the Capua Ludus who'd play a key role in Spartacus's rebellion against Rome. A Gaul by the name of Crixus.
No smarter than your last beating. Finally, a fight. I can practice smashing your head in.
There's evidence from across the empire that living and fighting side by side created strong bonds between gladiators.
Rather brilliantly, we know from some inscriptions from gladiator schools like this that some slaves shared a real sense of solidarity, almost comradeship. For example, a gladiator's burial might be paid for by his familiar, his troop, or even by his doctor or trainer. This is a bit of evidence that reveals a really unexpected detail in one gladiator's life. It's from Milan, and it's the commemoration of the short life of Urbicus. Now, Urbicus was a secutor, or chaser, so that's a gladiator who fights with a sword and a shield. And this inscription is written in Latin, and it's very eroded, but this is how it translates. To Urbicus, secutor of the first grade, from Florence by birth, who fought 13 times and lived 22 years. This memorial is set up by his daughter Olympias, whom he left at the age of 5 months, and Euricia, his wife, for her well-deserving husband with whom she lived for 7 years. May those who love him honour his spirit.
Whichever way you look at it, the lot of a gladiator like Spartacus was grim. Compounding his sudden loss of freedom was the very real sense of physical danger. Every time he went into combat, he faced the possibility of life-changing injury or even death, or inflicting both on his fellow gladiators. It was a desperate existence. Spartacus felt he had to seize back control of his fate. He began desperately planning to break out of the cruel cage of a life that the Romans had built for him.
not share a cell with this Thracian pig.
I always wanted a reason to kill you, Spartacus.
We kill for you every day. We're 210. Let's go. No. Free the others. There isn't the time. Just the two of us. Odds are in our favor. Who will find us?
They will always find us, Croesus.
We are many.
We can fight back. Go!
Which way? Whichever way we want. We're free. Come on.
Spartacus and 70 other gladiators broke out of the Capua Ludus. According to one historian, they got lucky when they came across guards escorting a shipment of weapons at the gates of Capua.
This morning we were escaped slaves with nothing but kitchen knives. Now we're armed with Roman steel. And we've acquired a taste for freedom. The freedom Rome took away. Join us. We will grant you yours.
We're told by Appian that Spartacus quickly made for the highest point in the landscape.
Spartacus and a few hundred of his followers camped out near the summit of Mount Vesuvius. Pursued and then trapped by Roman forces, they made a daring escape by turning wild vines into ropes and lowering themselves down behind the Roman soldiers, who they then massacred. Spartacus and his deeds of daring do were becoming the stuff that legends are made of.
Rome had created a crisis of their own making. A band of trained killers roaming through these very hills and woods in southern Italy would soon become a rebel army with a serious grudge against Rome.
That summer of 73 BC, as word spread of Spartacus's revolt, more and more slaves left their fields and abandoned their masters to join him. First a trickle, and then a flood. Soon there were tens of thousands rampaging through the countryside, spreading terror and panic. For the Roman Republic, what had started as a simple prison breakout had escalated with horrifying speed into something much more serious. A full-blown slave revolt. This was an army of the disgruntled, the desperate, and the dispossessed, all malcontents with their own grievances against Rome. And it exposed the Republic to a chilling problem. That protest and the idea of freedom is contagious.
The same harsh conditions that Romans used to control their slaves fired the desperate energy of the rebellion. And the Roman authorities were clearly caught off guard by the speed of its spread.
The toughest, most experienced legions are not there. Their strongest forces are out in the east, where all the riches of the Roman Empire still are, and they're out in Spain. I think they didn't think he would be such a military threat, but they were much more concerned with his moral threat to undermine the fabric of Roman society. Spartacus is a very frightening idea if you're a Roman.
A year after Spartacus's breakout, and after months of anarchy in southern Italy, Rome raised 4 legions, 20,000 soldiers, to take on Spartacus. It was time to stamp out the rebellion, to reassert control. Near Mount Gargano, the Romans intercepted a column commanded by Spartacus's right-hand man, Crixus, as it moved north.
The details of what happened next are pretty sketchy, but it's clear that the battle was an utter disaster for the rebels. 2/3 of the slave army were slaughtered, including Crixus himself.
Rome's legions were bearing down on Spartacus. The slave army would soon be cornered by one of the most formidable fighting forces in history.
There are thousands.
The Roman army. In 72 BC, Spartacus's misfit band of slaves were cornered by 4 legions of the legendary Roman army. But Spartacus, a former Roman soldier, knew how to exploit their predictable tactics.
There are thousands. It's more than we have ever faced.
Have faith, Ardemir. They are Romans. They fight one way. We will use their strength and numbers against them. They won't see us coming. Nor will many of them live to see us leave. We can do this. You deliver a message for me. You tell Rome we will never be slaves again.
Spartacus used speed and surprise to inflict a humiliating defeat on the legions. Rome was on the ropes. But making a deal with the victorious slaves wasn't an option. Instead, Rome put one of her richest and most uncompromising citizens in charge. His name was Marcus Licinius Crassus. When some of the soldiers fled Spartacus's rebels, his response was designed to send out a message.
Do you know what disturbs me most about this rebel army? Not that these filthy slaves rampage through Roman outlet. But that my own army allow them to do so. Unchallenged. "500 gutless cowards, deserving of death. The problem is, if I kill them all, I have no army. And they have learned nothing."
This was the brutal Roman practice of decimation, an extreme disciplinary measure in which 1 in every 10 men, chosen by lot, were beaten to death by their own comrades.
this way they are all punished.
This is the gruesome origin of our own verb, to decimate, to take a tenth.
And only 50. Die.
It was typical Roman brutality, handing out punishments to reassert a control that seemed to be slipping from their grasp. But Crassus's measures had the desired effect. His army now knew that defeat wasn't an option, and they were determined to wreak revenge on the rebel slaves. Two years after escaping, Spartacus's army, about 30,000 strong, squared up to Crassus's 40,000 in a final showdown with Rome.
I would not choose this day for battle, nor this place for a battlefield. This is where fate has led us. Bring me my horse. My horse.
Crassus was a formidable adversary, and Spartacus knew that he and his men could expect no mercy if they were defeated.
If we win today, I will have many horses to choose from. If we lose, Crassus wins the day. I will have no need for a horse.
Spartacus had a desperate strategy. With the battle raging around him, he headed straight for Crassus, hoping to secure victory by cutting off the head of the snake. In the aftermath of the defeat, there was no "I am Spartacus" moment. That was a Hollywood invention. Instead, there was just typical, savage Roman retribution. This is the Appian Way, and all along this road, from Rome to Capua, where it all began, Crassus crucified 6,000 of the surviving slave rebels. So that would have been a crucifixion every 30 yards or so for over 100 miles. The thought of the cruelty and the suffering here is just sickening. Spartacus and his men were dead, but slavery lived on. In the face of a crisis of their own making, Rome didn't back down or offer any concessions. Instead, they doubled down, choosing the most extreme punishment they could conceive as a very public warning to anyone who might dare to take on Rome. For 2 years, the Roman Republic had been intimidated by an army of slaves and outsiders. For them, a horrifying inversion of the natural order of things. Spartacus had become a bogeyman, a demonic name used to frighten Roman children at night. Excessive violence and a promise of retribution. The same rules applied to the conquered peoples of the empire. Mostly it worked. Rome put down violent rebellions throughout its history as it had established control of its borders. But there were times when that pitiless approach backfired. Never more so than in 60 AD, here in Britain, when one woman led an uprising to rival Spartacus, a rebellion that threatened to loosen Rome's hold on the fringes of empire. In the years after Spartacus's death, Rome expanded its empire into the heart of Europe, conquering Gaul, now modern-day France, before marching east to the Netherlands and Germany. The Roman army then launched a third invasion of Britain in 43 AD, finally bringing the Roman project to the wild island at the end of the world. But not everyone wanted to be a cog in the well-oiled Roman machine. And sometimes Rome had to resort to extreme brutality to maintain control. Rulers of tribes like the Iceni were forced to submit to the ruthless invaders. Amongst their number was a young woman called Boudica.
So you want us to bow down before your emperor in Rome? And you want me to keep my people from cutting off your balls? And in return, you keep your throne. You keep your lands. We'll give you military protection. And I have a gift from the emperor. Open it. You think we can be bought with gold? No. But I think you can recognize good terms when you're offered them.
Spying on us?
No,
Hear anything interesting?
I don't trust the Romans.
The Iceni were just one of many warring tribes in Britannia. Before the Romans arrived, they'd constantly been at one another's throats. This is Warham Camp in East Anglia, an Iceni stronghold for at least 100 years before the Romans arrived. Now, it might not look like much from down here, but if you look from above, you get a sense of just how impressive this place was 2,000 years ago. These ramparts were built as a defence against constant attacks from neighbouring tribes. Rome was quick to exploit these age-old rivalries. It was classic divide and conquer. 1,800 years before the word mafia had been invented, the Romans had set up a kind of massive protection racket right across the empire. They would promise to protect a particular tribe in return for cooperation and loyalty and good behaviour. For many leaders, this was an offer they couldn't refuse. And the native Britons were no different. Like all good mafia rackets, the terms were underpinned by the threat of violent retribution. But Rome was having to make adjustments of its own when dealing with the tribes of Britannia, including a class of rulers they weren't really used to and clearly underestimated: women. We know from the great Roman author Tacitus, whose father-in-law was actually stationed here in Britannia, that one of the tribes, the Brigantes, was actually ruled by a woman, Queen Cartimandua. Now,
Queen Cartimandua had handed over her territory as a client kingdom to Rome. It meant that she could still rule, but she had to submit to Rome's authority.
This is a rain ring from a chariot, and it is decorated.
Dr. Julia Farley is a leading expert in Iron Age Britain.
It is a fascinating situation because for Romans, women should very definitely be second-class citizens. They're not expected to wield real political power. So how do they react to what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to read the sources we have about Queen Cartimandua because obviously she's an ally of the Romans, and so they're actually talking about her quite negatively. Tacitus talks about her being treacherous and cunning and self-indulgent because he doesn't really approve of, a woman holding power in that way and how she behaves. So I think it's really kind of difficult for the Romans because they need powerful leaders like Cartimandua on side. That's how they're controlling these areas of the provinces. So they're having to make this adjustment to deal with her, even though she's a powerful woman.
But 2,000 miles from Britain, evidence has been uncovered that reveals what Romans really thought of their remote province and its women rulers. Here in Aphrodisias, modern southwest Turkey, we can encounter the true face of the imperial vision. These sculptures from the Sebastion, or Monument to Emperors, a collection of around 80 pieces of imperial propaganda. We can see how Rome portrayed its conquest of Britannia to the rest of the empire.
I think this is one of the most disturbing images from across antiquity. What you're looking at is the Emperor Claudius triumphantly dominating a naked woman. Britannia. This tells us a huge amount, both about Rome's attitude to its new province, but also about its attitude to women. It is merciless, it's misogynist, and it's also a chilling foreshadowing of what was to come, of that day when Rome's dismissive attitude to women would come back to haunt it.
Don't touch my girl! No! No!
By 47 AD, 4 years after its conquest, the warlike tribes of Britannia seemed pacified by Rome's trademark mixture of threats and promises. Rome's domination over Britannia included most of the south and east. As well as the Iceni, there were the Trinovantes, also in East Anglia, and the Brigantes in the north, with rebels fleeing to Wales. The tribes were kept in line with rich rewards and oppressive punishments. One of Rome's demands would prove particularly hard to swallow for the proud warriors of the Iceni.
People of Iceni, the carrying of weapons is now prohibited. All weapons must be surrendered. Failure to surrender your weapons will be treated as a violation of your privileges.
For Boudica and the Iceni, swords were an integral part of their tribal culture, an important status symbol.
I offer you my sword.
This is a mistake.
As usual, Rome came down hard on the Iceni, quickly crushing this first act of rebellion. The message to the tribes of Britannia was clear: stay in line or pay a heavy price.
We don't know what happened to their king, but we do know that despite the rebellion, the Romans still allowed the Iceni to be ruled by one of their own.
On the condition that they gave up their precious swords, Boudica's husband Prasutagus was allowed to become king.
What should I say to the tribe?
It's not what you say that matters. It's what you do.
Under Prasutagus, the Iceni surrendered their weapons, making it even easier for Rome to threaten and bully them.
The king keeps his sword.
But the ill treatment of the Iceni was about to go to a whole new level and drive them to rebellion. The conquering Emperor Claudius died in 54 AD, and his great-nephew, the infamous Nero, took control. For Nero, the provinces of Rome were all about lining his pockets. One man was instrumental in triggering open rebellion in Britannia: Catus Decianus. Nero's procurator relished a strategy of iron-fisted bullying to please the new emperor.
What news?
Prasutagus is dead.
I, King Prasutagus of the Iceni, hereby declare that in the event of my death, a will, very Roman, in the event of my death, half my kingdom shall pass to the Emperor of Rome, and half I bequeath to my 2 daughters. Thank you.
What Decianus does next will shatter the peace and tear the province of Britannia apart.
Have you come to pay your respects, Roman?
This land now belongs to Rome. You will all serve the Emperor. All royal property will be handed over to me.
No, my husband left a will.
Sadly, the kingdom wasn't his to give. Certainly not to 2 elves.
You insult his memory.
Stand aside, woman.
Get your filthy Roman feet off our sacred land.
Take everything, flock her, rape them, and leave all 3 of them alive.
No. No! Don't touch my girl! No! No! Don't touch my girl! No! No! Don't touch my girl!
The outrage against Boudica and her daughters was disgusting. It was a horrific, invasive, personal attack. But it was more than that too. It was the dishonouring of a queen and the disgrace of her people. This was Rome using rape as a weapon of war. And for many millions of so-called barbarians, the Peregrini, the foreigners who lived under Roman military occupation, this must have been the stark reality, the savage face of Roman control.
We will make them pay.
Boudica's revenge for this day will cost the Empire dear.
No doubt the Romans thought that the humiliated and now leaderless Iceni would collapse and surrender. It was another page out of the Roman conquest notebook, absorbing a kingdom once a client king had died. I'm sure the very last thing that they expected was for a woman to take control. But as we've seen with Cartimandua, for the native Britons, there was zero problem accepting female leadership.
Give me my love.
Bitter experience had taught Boudica that the Iceni were no match for the Roman occupiers. So she took a dangerous gamble. She'd look for allies amongst the rival tribes of Britannia. Together, they would attempt one of the most ferocious rebellions that Rome had ever faced.
Mars help us all.
In 60 AD, the rebel Boudica is looking for allies. She first approached an old rival, the Trinovantes.
I am Boudica, Queen of the Iceni. I've come to speak with your king.
We have no king. Rome is our king now.
The Iceni will no longer take orders from Rome. We will drive them out. We will fight them, but we need weapons. I know you haven't given over all your swords.
Who says so?
You seem unable or unwilling to take them up yourself. So hand them over to us. We would be happy to do your work for you.
Why should we hand our swords over to you?
If you don't give them to us, we will take them. Or you could take them up yourselves and fight the Romans alongside us. If, though, as I say, you have no use for them.
Quiet. I'm thinking.
The Trinovantes were considered the most powerful tribe in Britain. And Boudica knew they too had plenty of reason to hate the Romans.
It was here, right in the heart of the Trinovantes' tribal land, that the Romans had built their provincial capital, Camulodunum, now Colchester. It had come to house a military garrison, and the farmland all around had been dished out to Roman veterans, part of a retirement package after 25 years of service in the legions. Boudica had played this to her advantage, harnessing the festering fury of the Trinovantes and gaining a crucial ally in the fight with Rome.
Makes me sick to my stomach. Their temple, to their emperor, that we paid for.
What you're looking at here is the remains of a Norman castle. But originally there was a much bigger building on this site. All these bits of red brick were part of a Roman temple dedicated to the Emperor Claudius, who'd been deified, turned into a god after his death. Pretty much standard practice for emperors. This giant temple was even taller than the building that's here now, and it was a real focal point for the city. It wasn't just a place of religious importance where animal sacrifices were made. It doubled up as a meeting place where money was lent and where people traded goods.
In 2016, hidden under modern Colchester, archaeologists discovered the astonishing scale of this controversial temple.
So explain to me what it is I'm looking at here.
Well, you're looking at the remains of this massive monumental arcade. It's called an arcade because it's a series of arches. Temple of Claudius is the largest classical-style temple that we know of in Britain. And this is the big, huge arcade forming the front of it. So you'd pass through the centre of this arcade to get into this public space and to access the temple. And what we see here is the core, the remains of this support for two arches. This would have gone up a total of 8 metres and then split to form two arches. And one would have come down to the remains of the next support over there.
Okay, so where that little second block is. And do we know in the original how many arches there'd have been in total?
We calculate there would have been 26 arches in all.
Because that's really big, isn't it?
And it would have been 120 metres long.
That's enormous. I mean, it's a huge structure then, this.
It is ginormous.
Amazing.
Yes.
Archaeologists have created a computer reconstruction showing the vast scale of the arcade surrounding the temple. It was unlike anything else in Europe, and its purpose would have been solely to impress anyone who saw it.
For the locals, I mean, this would be completely alien, I mean, really intimidating.
Well, it must have been like a spaceship had landed in a big field for most of them. So it was very intimidating.
This was Rome proclaiming its absolute power. But they'd once again underestimated the tribes of Britannia and pushed them into a rebel alliance against their overbearing rule.
And now the people of Colchester, both Romans and native Britons alike, were about to feel the heat of that simmering resentment.
Go! Run! Get out! Get out!
Come on, hurry! Come on! Please, no. Please.
The flogging of Boudica was a preemptive blow, designed to crush her spirit. Instead, she launched an onslaught of fire and fury that left thousands of Romans and native Britons dead.
Down here is all that's left of the Temple of Claudius. And these are the original foundations. And up above, for 2 days, the petrified surviving inhabitants were barricaded in as Boudica's army systematically ransacked the town, house by house.
We used to rely on the Roman historian Tacitus for descriptions of Boudica's sack of the Roman town. But recently, archaeologists have found incredible evidence of the level of sheer destruction dished out by the rebels. We have brilliant written accounts of this event. How good is the archaeology for it?
Through the burning, we have some material as a kind of snapshot from that day, that exact time when Boudica attacked the city.
Amazing. It's this kind of brilliant irony, isn't it, that destruction actually saves history for us.
Yes, like examples of Samian ware that were reduced to this dark black colour.
Amazing.
Glass was reduced to these molten fragments.
It's kind of hideous in a way, holding this and thinking of the suffering that would have accompanied this. You know, there you can feel the heat of Boudica's fury.
Yes. And in 2014, they uncovered a larder and they found lots of foods that people would have been eating at the time. So you have the burnt lentils here, and here's the modern equivalent.
Amazing. And then dates, which of course would have been incredibly exotic then.
Yes, they would have been.
I can safely say this is the first time in my life I've ever held a 2,000-year-old date.
Well, yes.
Possibly the last as well. And was it just food that survived there, or was there anything else?
Well,
in the larder?
no, actually. Buried beneath this mundane daily material were an exceptional collection of jewellery items. When Boudica attacked the town, whoever was living in the household at the time acted in pure desperation. They found all of their most precious items and they decided to hide them underneath the floor.
It's heavy.
It is gold, it is very heavy,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
such a large item, it is quite weighty.
So lovely to hold it. That's absolutely beautiful, beautiful piece.
We don't have any traces of who they were. This is the one snapshot we have of their life. But it does have that close personal story that does make it even more exciting.
So this is a history-making, game-changing moment, and our evidence, as well as the gold, is a burnt date.
It is, yes, exactly.
It is sobering thinking of the death and destruction that would have been suffered here. Archaeologists tell us that not a single building was left standing. Boudica had embarked on a war of annihilation. As word of the carnage spread, more and more native Britons threw in their lot with the rebels. Decianus realised he'd underestimated Boudica. He dispatched the 9th Legion, a unit of around 5,000 battle-hardened soldiers to deal with her. He also sent word to the Roman governor of Britannia, Suetonius Paulinus, who was crushing rebel forces in North Wales. Paulinus left Wales and raced to Londinium to organise a defence. The empire was relying on its reputation of military invincibility and the promise of crushing remorseless victory. No one could expect to beat Rome for long, and no one could expect mercy when they lost.
What's this I hear, Decianus? Rome humiliated by an army of illiterate half-breeds led by a woman?
I sent the 9th Legion.
Well, that's all that's left of the 9th Legion. And Boudica is marching on Londinium. Are you ready for her, Decianus? Because you don't look ready. And I suspect the Emperor will have you executed for this debacle.
Boudica's defeat of the 9th Legion would have shocked the Romans. General Paulinus knew he couldn't defend London with the few men he had with him. Our details of what happened next are pretty sketchy, but one thing is certain, Decianus did not hang around. When he heard that Boudica's army was advancing on London, he slipped onto a boat and sailed across the channel, where he disappears from history. Boudica and her rapidly growing army descended on Londinium and destroyed it. The warrior queen soon showed the Romans that she could match them for vengeful brutality. She was said to have cut the breasts off women and sewn them into their own mouths. Boudica's following continued to grow as she swept onto Verulamium, St Albans, and burnt it. 3 towns in ashes and thousands dead. General Paulinus, reunited with his army in Wales, headed south in a desperate attempt to crush the rebellion.
Hold!
Mars, help us all.
At an unidentified place, probably in the West Midlands, Boudica's army, now in the tens of thousands, came face to face with General Paulinus and his small force of 10,000 Roman legionaries. This was Boudica's chance to drive Rome from Britannia's shores. The confrontation would come to be called the Battle of Watling Street.
I thought there'd be more of them. What? What is it?
I have a bad feeling, Visito.
No, you don't. Because of you, we have these numbers. We stand united for the first time against a common enemy. You do not have a bad feeling about this.
Sounds like there are more women and children than men. Keep your soldiers together. And on my word, advance and don't stop.
Boudica's forces outnumbered the Romans by perhaps as many as 3 or 4 to 1. But they'd never met a disciplined Roman army in full combat before. Everything hinged on this confrontation. The size of Boudica's army actually began to work in Rome's favour. As the rebels surged forward, those at the front were crushed against an immovable wall of Roman shields. And then they faced Roman blades. Boudica's warriors were no match for the dreadful efficiency of the Romans. They were either crushed or slaughtered without mercy. Tacitus tells us that 80,000 native Britons died and just 400 Romans. Even given the doubtless exaggeration, this was a total, shattering defeat. According to Tacitus, Boudica took poison as her army was defeated. But that's actually a literary cliche of the time. Defeated generals commit suicide, women take poison. Think of Cleopatra, killed by the venom of an asp. It's actually more likely that Boudica fell on the battlefield, where Britannia's hopes of freedom from Rome also died.
Boudica became a legendary figure for Rome, a kind of uber woman. She was described as having tawny hair down to her hips and flashing eyes and a strident voice and being immensely tall. Basically, in order to explain her successes, the Romans had to turn her into an anti-superhero.
Once again, Roman tactics of extreme violence carried the day. Boudica's tribe had once benefited from Rome, but had also felt the full brunt of its rage as the superpower ferociously reasserted control.
For the next 350 years, most of Britain was part of a vast intercontinental superstate, the Roman Empire, and its legacy is still felt today. Literacy, Christianity, the power of the pen were all brought here to Britain, a shortening of the Latin word Britannia, by the Romans.
The lesson of Boudica and Spartacus was clear to anyone. You may beat Rome on your day, but Rome will always come back at you hard. Rome will win.